my husband come flying around the corner in our car, and I just said, "Is she dead?" And he said, "Yeah."
This is a grandmother who's been shot in a car park of the block of flats where she lives.
If you were to put a list of places where somebody could be shot in the head, Earls Barton wouldn't register.
We were catapulted into a world that we had no idea on. We weren't from any kind of criminal background.
Who's done this? What's their motive for doing this? Is there any other risk to the wider public?
Contact made of this door.
He knew what was going to happen, he helped what was going to happen, and he helped cover up what had happened.
This case was about a carefully planned, cold-blooded murder. It was also about a brutal betrayal between old friends.
In the heart of Northamptonshire, on the banks of the River Nene, lies the ancient and thriving village of Earls Barton.
Earls Barton is an incredibly busy village, a lively village, full of people, generations, family.
Nice village. It's been a nice village for years, and it's always been a community village, so everyone gets involved with everything, and most people know most people.
It's kind of tucked away from nowhere. You'd never find it unless you stumbled across it, but it's a real gem, I think, of the county.
So you've got your doctors, your chemists, the schools, the butchers, the bakers, pretty much the candlestick makers.
I can honestly say Earls Barton is the best place I've ever lived and worked in. It's a place where people genuinely love each other, they genuinely care about each other. It's a place where community comes very naturally to the people here.
And it's this close-knit, safe community that attracted Marion Price and her family to set up home.
My mum was originally from Liverpool. She moved down with one of her other sisters and ended up meeting my dad, falling in love and getting married.
With 2 children to care for, Marion juggled home life with work as a bursar at a local nursery school.
My mum was always cleaning when we were younger. That's all I ever remember. She'd got the Motown on or just any kind of music, and she'd be cleaning and washing the windows every Saturday. Just always singing and dancing and just happy, really, yeah.
Yeah, she's one of those people. She loved working with the children. She loved the colleagues she worked with. She was always looking to make people smile, looking to make people happy. If someone was down, she would always try and help them and cheer them up. And she was just a lovely person to be around.
And family was everything to Marion.
Marion Price was a loving grandmother, mother, daughter, sister. She was a family woman, she was bubbly, she had a big family support around her.
We were always getting together, barbecues, Christmases, Easter. You know, it was a very big family.
When their children were older, Marion and her husband separated, but remained the closest of friends.
I was about 21 when Mum and Dad divorced. You know, they were separated on good terms.
In their divorce settlement, basically my mum kept the house and my dad kept the land on the side, and he eventually built the house and ended up living next door to my mum for quite a while. So yeah, it was very amicable between my mum and my dad.
Despite having her family around her, as the years passed, Marion felt something was missing.
So when my mum and dad parted ways, she was a bit of a lost soul for a while, and you know, she was sort of missing that family setup.
She was looking to spend her days with somebody, go on holiday with somebody, you know, sort of grow old with somebody that she could have fun with, which I think, you know, that's all anybody wants, isn't it? Like to either be looked after or just have a companion. I mean, she's got her friends and obviously us, but you go home on your own at the end of the day, don't you?
So I suggested online dating. You know, she went on a few dates and then she met Michael Reader.
To everyone's surprise, Marion's relationship with Michael moved fast.
It was a bit of a whirlwind romance. They were very quickly engaged and very quickly married.
And she was just like, no, I'm certain. She was, you know, he makes me laugh, he's funny, and she was happy.
After a few years married, the relationship ran its course and the couple separated. And by December 2019, Marion was excitedly making plans to spend Christmas with son Gary.
So I was speaking to my mum a lot on the phone, and she was just really excited to come down for Christmas and see our brand new house, really.
But 10 days before Christmas, life for everyone was to change forever.
Got a phone call off my friend who lives in the same block of flats as my mum. She said, you know, that your mum's car windows are smashed in. And then she'd gone back outside to look into the car and then saw my mum. She said, your mum's unconscious, I think you need to get round here.
I was at home, off work, and my partner was working, but he came home about 4 o'clock, and so we were just having a couple of drinks, celebrating a few days off together, and I think it was about 8 o'clock, I got a phone call from my sister, and she was crying, and my face immediately dropped, and I was like, what's wrong? And she told me that Mum's been attacked.
Tony's husband, Scott, immediately dashed to the scene to check on Marion.
My husband come flying around the corner in our car, and then he said, get in the car. He started driving to the hospital, and I just said, is she dead? And he said, yeah.
And I remember just falling to the floor and screaming, and the rest of that evening's a complete blur, if I'm honest. It was just, you know, you go from complete elation, having a good Sunday evening, to your whole world just crumbling.
I was on call this weekend. It was a Sunday night. I remember it really well, actually. It was about sort of 8 o'clock time. The first call was just, right, we've got a lady in a car in a quiet little village outside a block of flats. Windows have all been put in, and we think she's got a significant head injury. So I got in the car and I drove to the scene immediately, really. I knew it was one that I'd have to go to.
On arrival in Earls Barton, the true horror of the scene before him unfolded.
Driving to this estate, it's Christmas lights up everywhere. The victim's car, Marion's car, with the window smashed. The scenes of crime manager has seen Marion and assessed the scene. He said to me, look, this looks like a firearms discharge.
Police immediately launch a murder investigation.
Earls Barton is one of the last places in Northamptonshire that you'd imagine something like this happening. If you were to put a list of places where somebody could be shot in the head, Earls Barton wouldn't register.
In the quaint village of Earls Barton, Northamptonshire police have just launched a murder investigation after 63-year-old grandmother Marion Price was found dead in her car.
It was confirmed by our family liaison officer that she'd died from a single shotgun wound to the head through her car door. I mean, she hadn't even taken her seatbelt off, and she was shot through the window.
The majority of the murders we deal with most recently have been knife-related, knife crime or drunken incidents that are just accidents that have happened and have ended in tragedy. This was somebody's actually shot her through the window of her car. It was extraordinary. She just isn't the type of victim that you'd expect a gun crime incident to have occurred for.
She had no enemies, you know. It was just a far cry from the world that we're all from. You know, I mean, we don't know anyone with guns, we don't know criminals of that level. Like, it was all too much to take in. It was horrendous.
This is a grandmother who's been shot in the car park of the block of flats where she lives. Who's done this? What's their motive for doing this? Is there any other risk to the wider public?
Immediately, police seal off the village, sending shockwaves throughout the community.
So lots of residents in the area woke up on Monday morning to see police tape everywhere, people in white forensic suits, and the first thought was, what on earth has happened here?
It's just unbelievable that gradually the village wakes up to a scenario that nobody can quite believe has really happened, especially when it's somebody you've been familiar with.
The community started to learn the nature of what happened to Marion. It came as a huge shock because of the intensity of the violence of the crime.
There was a little bit of fear that someone's going round, someone's shooting somebody in a residential area that's quiet. How has this happened?
Forensic officers scoured the scene, desperate for clues as to who could have carried out this atrocious crime.
This lady just parked her car, literally turned it off, as someone shot her in the head at point-blank range. You think that means somebody's had to have been there before her, had to have been hiding in the dark, because it was... We narrowed it down eventually to about 5 o'clock it probably happened, but it's 5 o'clock in the middle of December, very cold, very sort of damp that evening, and you think somebody's laid in wait for her. And you think, who's going to have done that?
The evidence from the forensic scientists showed that Marion had been shot by somebody effectively standing at the door of her car. It also showed that prior to being shot, she had put up her hand to try and protect her head. Completely futile, tragically, in the circumstances, because there was injuries to the hand which showed that to be the case.
Police established that on the morning of the 15th of December, Marion had visited her sister to get her hair done. From there, she did some grocery shopping for her mum, dropped that at her house before arriving back at her flat around 5 p.m. She was shot dead before she'd even had a chance to take off her seatbelt. One theory is immediately ruled out.
It was obvious from the outset that this wasn't some robbery, because her handbag and its content was still in the passenger front footwell.
With no murder weapon at the scene, police have to consider something even more terrifying.
You've got almost what looks to be almost like gangland-style execution has happened in the middle of this little village.
I think our initial thoughts were it could be a contract killing, because we didn't know anyone else that would have anything to do with something like that.
With the shooting showing all the hallmarks of a professional hit, police need to establish if Marion was the target, or was it a case of mistaken identity? So delve deeper into life with her second husband, Michael Reeder.
Can't really pinpoint the time that she started to change, but it was definitely not long after they got married. I would say probably within the year, she started to look tired. She wasn't putting makeup on.
It seemed like he was charming all the right people. He was doing lovely things for her, for my sister's kids. He was going golfing with my brother-in-law. He was nice and pleasant to the people he needed to be at the time. But I would see different traits in my mum that just wasn't my mum. She'd lost her spark.
I could see she wasn't happy, but I think she didn't want to be seen as a failure. Like, you know, I've married him really quick, people didn't approve, you know, they're going to say, I told you so. So she tried to stick it out.
In 2017, Marion and Michael split up.
When my mum left him, she called me straight away and just said, I've left Mike. And it was like this weight was just lifted off my shoulder. She was like, this is the next chapter of my life now. Like, I'm going to enjoy it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And yeah, she was just really excited about what was to come.
And in November 2019, the couple decided to make their separation official.
They were divorced, and just a month before that Marion was shot, he'd been ordered to pay her £10,000 at a court hearing.
After the court, the next few days, he was due to pay that £10,000 into my mum's bank on the 16th of December.
But the day before the money was due to be paid, Marion's life was cruelly taken from her. Something police believe is no coincidence.
I suspected instantly that the person who has had to pay her money in an acrimonious divorce battle has a motive. And he's a very good suspect. So I'd sent some uniformed resources. They were firearms officers that went round to arrest him.
Contact made at the front with Mr. Reader. Yeah, he's just putting his dog indoors. You're all right. Right, just come in, Mr. Reader. Pop your lolly down somewhere. My friend, I need to have a chat with you. Just go in.
He opened the door, still holding an ice cream in his hand, when the officers said that his ex-wife had been found dead.
At this moment in time, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder of your ex-partner. You do not have to say anything, ma'am. Your defence, you're not mentioned when questioned something straight on court, and you do say it may be given evidence. Your arrest is necessary for a prompt investigation to that offence and to secure evidence. Do you understand that? Just put your hands like that for me.
Yeah, well, you're in the house. You are.
When we've heard that he'd been arrested, we all were relieved. So it was a big, huge sigh of relief that he'd been arrested.
Just waiting for another car to come, and you're going to be taken to Criminal Justice Centre. All right? Yeah. Where you'll be spoken to further about this incident. All right. You're under caution, sir. I'll just remind you, you do not have to say anything. Mainly defences, do not mention when questioned something that's raised on in court, and you do say maybe evidence. All right? Have a seat.
When did this happen?
Early this evening, sir. Have a seat. Your ex-partner is Marion Price. Yeah.
You know, who else would have wanted to hurt my mum? Nobody. Absolutely nobody.
Michael Reader is taken in for questioning, but having found no murder weapon at the scene or at Michael's home, the police have little to link him to the crime scene and need to establish if he pulled the trigger or ordered the hit on Marion.
Very pressured environment because we've got an initial 24 hours, then we can ask a superintendent internally for another 12. We didn't have any sort of fingerprints or anything like that on the car at the time that we could tie him to. We didn't get anything back from our fast-track submissions to the forensic lab, so we couldn't forensically initially put him there at the crime scene. We just were left with, he's done this. He's got to have done this.
But police have no concrete evidence tying Reader to the murder. Time is running out to keep him in custody, and police searching his home have found nothing of interest.
Couldn't find a mobile phone for him, which is unusual. I know he was sort of late 60s at the time, but everyone has a mobile phone.
They looked at his bank accounts, and his bank account revealed a direct debit to a mobile phone company. The police don't need the handset in order to get the information they need from a mobile phone. They need the data from that phone, and that can be obtained through the phone company.
Information from Michael Reader's mobile phone data soon turned the investigation on its head.
So we get this call data. He's got a monthly contract phone. This is the number of it, and these are all the people he's called. And his top contact is somebody called Stephen Welch. And he's in contact with this guy all the time. Literally, it's 90% of his calls are backwards and forwards Stephen Welch. So you're thinking, right, Stephen Welch is somebody who's of definite interest to us.
So who is Stephen Welch? And what is his link to Michael Reader? And what does he know about the brutal killing of Marion?
Michael Reader's best friend was a man named Stephen Welch. They'd known each other for decades. They played snooker 7 days a week. They even went round and had sort of family parties together. They were almost like brothers.
Reader and Welch went back years. I recall that, as far as Stephen was concerned, they'd met when they were probably in their 20s. So they'd known each other for about 40 years. And they'd met in the local motor trade. It was almost as if he was attracted to Reader like a moth to a flame. He looked on Reader really as an older brother. Reader was about 10 years older. Reader had the nice house, the E-type Jag, the snooker table. Stephen didn't really have anybody.
So I sent some cops down a couple of days in to go and speak to Stephen Welch. Find out, is he a suspect? Is he a witness? What do you know about Michael Reader? What do you know about where he was? after persistent knocking, his flatmate answered. And his flatmate sort of like, oh no, I dropped him off at the airport.
Welch's flatmate reveals he flew to Alicante just hours after Marion was shot dead. Immediately, police get a warrant to search his address. And finally, there's a breakthrough.
We found a phone that turned out to be Michael Reeder's phone on his bedside cabinet. And we found a tracking device inside the glove box of his car.
They could then establish in the course of their investigation that the tracking device, which has a SIM card, just like a mobile phone, had been placed on Marion's car. He had been tracking his ex-wife the course of the past year.
In Northampton, officers investigating the shooting of grandmother Marion Price have arrested 70-year-old Michael Reeder on suspicion of murder.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder.
What? In the house. What? You are.
But now they have another man in their sights, his friend Stephen Welch, who appears to have fled to Spain on the night of the murder.
So he's raised to suspect status because I think that this is somebody that's helped Michael Reeder do this because of the calls, backwards and forwards, and calls on the day of the offence, the days leading up to offence. They're in constant contact. So I've thought, right, Michael Reeder has done this. He needed some help. This is the man that's helped him.
When we found out there was a second suspect, it just opened up so many other questions as to why that person would want to be involved. Why has he been drawn into this horrendous plan?
But while searching 61-year-old Welch's home, not only have police found Reeder's mobile phone, they've discovered a tracking device, which very quickly reveals some startling information.
What we started to understand is that Michael Reeder's phone was in contact with a tracking device for a period of about a year. Marion's car and the tracking device are in the same places at the same time. So we know the tracking device has been in the vicinity of Elsbarn, where she lives.
The discovery of the tracker device in Stephen Welch's car and the linking of that tracker device to Michael Reeder's phone showed that this was a man who was obsessed with where his ex-wife was and what she was doing. It is not a normal thing in the aftermath of even the most antagonistic of divorces for an ex-husband to put a tracker device on his ex-wife's car. But he did.
Whenever Michael Reeder wanted to work out where Marion was, he would send a text or call the number that was effectively on this tracker, and he'd be sent a location, and he could then map out where she was at what time of day.
I mean, when you find out someone's been tracking your mum, it's just another level of disgust. Like, you just can't believe or understand why someone would want to do that. Just sickening, absolutely sickening that he'd been stalking my mum for so long. And just devastated, absolutely heartbroken that my mum was even involved in a situation like this. Like, it shouldn't have happened.
Police still need to establish what Welch's involvement might have been. And analysing the tracker and the GPS phone data of both men proves enlightening. Every 5 to 7 days, the tracker sent a text message to Michael Reeder's phone, telling him the battery was low.
And we could prove that mostly Welch's car was going from Northampton to Elsbarton very regularly.
There was a perfectly sensible inference to be drawn that these various trips between Northampton and Elsbarton were for the sole purpose of charging the tracker.
In custody, police question Reeder about their findings.
Reeder didn't give away much. He predominantly answered no comment and just made it clear that he didn't kill his wife, and then refused to answer questions. He made us do all the work.
I suspect he thought that simply getting rid of the handset would be enough to get rid of the evidence trail that ultimately led to him. He was very wrong about that, and he completely failed to understand that all the police needed was, in fact, to access the data, and you don't always need the handset itself in order to do that.
Police might believe that Michael was tracking Marion for a year, but that didn't prove he had fired the gun which killed her. A gun which they still hadn't found.
Any case, such as this, where somebody is killed with either a knife or a gun, the first thing that you will want is the murder weapon. And the first thing you will want to tell a jury about is the murder weapon and whether there are fingerprints or DNA on it. We had no such thing. It's like a bit of a needle in a haystack. We knew we were after a shotgun, but we couldn't tell how long the barrel was. We didn't know what we were looking for other than it was a shotgun of some type.
So in most murder cases, you'd imagine that somebody might find a weapon, somebody might find bullets, and police put huge resources into that. They used big manpower. They searched the River Nen. They searched houses. They searched areas where they knew that Rita and Welch had been to, but they were never able to find it.
Despite having found no weapon, police do receive some interesting information.
There was a witness who had seen a man on a motorbike at a point that was looking up to where we knew Marion was visiting her mother for some 50 minutes.
We had an eyewitness that said there's a bloke there on a motorbike, and I saw him and he was sat there for half an hour playing on his phone.
Who was this man? Was it Michael Reader? Or Stephen Welch? Police believe whoever it was removed the tracker from Marion's car while she was visiting her mother, then followed her back to her own home on the motorbike.
He sat there on his motorbike waiting for her. He followed her back to the house and he shot her in cold blood through the window before she'd even had a chance to take her seatbelt off.
Convinced Marion's ex-husband was involved in some capacity, police charge Michael Reader with her murder. But their second suspect, Stephen Welch, is still in Spain, although it appears he is keeping a close eye on events back in the UK.
The police could see from Stephen Welch's phone he had been Googling as to what had happened.
And on 20th of December 2019, Stephen Welch gets a big surprise.
So we had a reception committee waiting for him as he came off the plane. And he came back and we arrested him.
Welch admitted he'd been ferrying the tracker backwards and forwards, and he admitted in evidence, I was complicit with a long-term stalking operation. I'm disgusted and ashamed of myself and everything.
News is made public that there is now not one, but two men charged with the murder of Marion Price.
It's just scary to think about how planned it was and the potential for it to be thought through enough for two people to be involved, and that someone else might know about it and have been able to have intervened and not. It's just scary, I suppose, to think about.
We were shocked when we found out that there was a second person involved, really shocked. We were just like, it's crazy enough that one person would want to do it, let alone an accomplice who has no reason towards my mum.
But with both men denying their involvement, police have their work cut out to build a case for trial.
Seeing Reader in court for the first time, I remember my heart racing, just pounding. I just felt sick when he walked in the room, but I just didn't want to show any emotion at all.
As the trial begins at Northampton Crown Court, the prosecution needs to lay out its case as to who pulled the trigger. And it very quickly becomes clear that one man has an ace up his sleeve.
In the first few days of the trial, Stephen Welch and Michael Reader sat in the dock together. They had the occasional chat. They were best friends after all. But it soon became apparent that actually it started to dawn on Stephen Welch that Michael Reader had really landed him in it big time. Within a few days of the trial starting, an extra dock officer was placed between them and the dock.
Stephen Welch had known that Reader had his ex-wife under surveillance. He did admit that he was playing a role in that. But at no time did Stephen Welsh accept that he'd known what was about to happen or what had happened.
As the trial unfolds, stories emerge revealing the truth behind Marion Price and Reada's relationship.
Listening to the court case, there was a lot of things that came out that we didn't know. That was upsetting and shocking. He'd hit her a couple of times and that he'd threatened to kill her a few times.
Marion initially dismissed her children's concerns that something was wrong. But as the years passed, things went from bad to worse.
She never told me or my brother the full story. Mum and Mike were due to come over my house for Christmas dinner, and for some reason he didn't come over. And then when she'd gone home, he'd taken all the Christmas decorations down.
I had got some tickets for my mum for Jersey Boys. At the end of the musical, the whole audience gets up to dance, and my mum loves to dance, loves to sing, and he didn't like it. So he stormed out of the auditorium, left her in London. He'd just gone back to Northampton on the train.
In 2017, Marion left Michael Reada. Unbeknown to her children, she continued to give Reada £54,000 when he demanded money, until she put her foot down and refused in May 2017. Something which sparked a violent rage in Reada.
So he come round and he threatened her, and she said, "I haven't got it, you can't have it." He said, "Well, then you're going to have to sell your house." And she was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And with that, he's pulled out a hammer, a mallet of some type, and hit her over the head several times.
Marion was taken to hospital, where she had stitches for a head wound and treatment for a broken finger. Reada was arrested and charged with grievous bodily harm.
It went to court, went to trial, and apparently, the jury come to the conclusion that he hadn't done it. They went with him instead of my mum. And I feel like she was failed then. Sorry.
He managed to convince a jury on the first occasion that went in front of a court that it was an accident, that he'd tried to push her away and she banged her head on a doorpost, and that's how she broke her head and fingers. He'd managed to convince people that he hadn't done something, and he got away with it.
But having been cleared of attacking Marion in the past, he now stands accused of her murder.
Reada, on day one in court, day one of him giving evidence, he walked in and he thought he'd charmed the jury into believing his side of the story, that somebody else did it, it was nothing to do with him.
He was so confident that he could get away with it that he thought he'd planned the perfect murder.
Having convinced a jury of his innocence once before, could Michael Reada once again walk away an innocent man? At Northampton Crown Court, Michael Reada and his best friend Stephen Welch are standing trial for the murder of Reada's ex-wife, Marion Price.
We never found the motorbike. We never found the firearm. They planned this really well.
From the outset, my concern was that Reada had not only planned to kill his wife, and he planned to get away with it, but he'd planned a fall guy by using Stephen Welsh as that fall guy.
The court hears how in November 2018, Michael Reada bought a tracking device and burner phone in order to start keeping tabs on Marion, something which the prosecution believe turned into a bigger plan.
What started off as stalking her to understand who she was with and where she was and whether she had a boyfriend and what she was doing with her money to help him with his divorce turned into the ideal method of tracking her so that he could kill her eventually.
And after being ordered to pay Marion £10,000 in a divorce settlement, Reada snapped.
When she came in and told me about it, and she was, upbeat, she was pleased that it had all gone through and it was done. But there was just a niggle, there was just something that made me think that it wasn't all over.
Reader was full of hate. He couldn't get his head around why Marion would leave him. He couldn't live with the fact that she'd left him, walked away, carried on with her life, had a family that loved her. He wanted to take that away from her. It was just jealousy, it was coercive control, and it was just him trying to have the final say on what happened with her life.
The court hears how on 15th of December 2019, Marion visited her sister to get her hair done before going shopping. She then drove her silver Corsa back to Earls Barton to her mother's house, where she unloaded shopping between 4:15 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. It is here the prosecution claims the tracker was removed from her car. Marion was followed home and shot dead through her window, before she'd even taken off her seatbelt. But who actually pulled the trigger?
Reader's defence was he had nothing to do with the murder. He accepted he was sort of directing what he referred to as a surveillance operation on his ex-wife, using Stephen to do that. What he didn't accept was ever travelling to Earls Barton himself. And his insinuation was that whilst they both knew there was a surveillance operation going on, it would have been Stephen Welsh that took it one step further, outside Reader's knowledge.
But the prosecution argues differently.
We believed, knowing all that we did, that Michael Reader would have wanted his ex-wife to see that it was him who was about to shoot her.
And they present the evidence they believe proves it.
This is where the Google data, the GPS data, came into play, was in relation to Stephen Welsh, because that showed not only had he waited patiently at Michael Reader's home address whilst Michael Reader's phone went off to Earls Barton and was located in the car park behind Marion's flat at the time that she was shot, but also, as soon as that was done, we saw Stephen Welsh's phone move from his address to meet the phone of Michael Reader in what turned out to be a garage slightly north of where Marion was living.
The jury is told that after executing Marion in cold blood, Reader once again turned to his trusted friend Stephen Welch, calling him to meet him at a nearby garage to dispose of the evidence.
He said that Michael Reader gave him his coat and asked him to get rid of it. He drove up to a reservoir in order to get rid of it.
There was evidence that demonstrated that Welsh had travelled up to something called, I think it's Pittsford Lakes, and then down to the River Nene in the hour or so after the shooting in order to dispose of paraphernalia connected with the murder.
Stephen Welch tried to say that he was simply a man doing a friend a favour. He said he had no idea what had happened, yet he had been asked to dispose of clothes without asking any questions. He'd been asked to meet Michael Reader at quite a rural location without asking any questions. He flew to Alicante the next morning. He saw stories online about Marion's death, and he asked no questions. Who does that?
The court hears that following this discovery, police searched the river.
We found a bag with some clothing, a rucksack that had been thrown into the river there, that became quite crucial at trial.
And despite Reader's insistence otherwise, the prosecution is adamant he was the one who pulled the trigger.
Whereas the prosecution case against Reader was, he was the shooter. The case against Welsh was, he was not the shooter. He was involved in what we call a joint enterprise. In other words, he was actively involved in the planning and assisting of the murder.
Having both denied their part in the murder, on 30th of November 2020, the jury retires to consider its verdict. Would Michael Reader once again walk away a free man?
Once the jury went out to deliberate on their verdicts, we really were as confident as we could be, even though it can always go wrong with a jury. And I have done a number of cases over the years in which a jury has come back with a verdict that was not expected.
After 3 days of deliberating, The jury returns its verdict. Stephen Welch is found guilty of murder. Michael Reader is found guilty of murder.
So we sat there in the court and they said guilty, and I just looked down and just started crying. Relief, you know, we've got justice for my mum.
You don't feel like there's anything to celebrate when the verdict comes in. It's very sad all round. You know, we've lost our mum. Their families have lost someone in their family to prison, and it's just there's just no one wins in that situation. No one comes out any the better.
On 21st of December 2020, just over a year after the brutal murder, Michael Reader is sentenced to life, with a minimum term of 31 years. Stephen Welch is jailed for a minimum of 27 years.
We were pleased with the sentencing, and the judge's sentencing remarks were great. She knew what they'd done. She sentenced them accordingly. It sends a message that this behaviour, that in this county you're not going to get away with that sort of thing. I'm sure that will be something the family will take heart in. Not from a vindictive point of view, from a point of view that he won't do anyone else any harm.
I think that Michael Reader was motivated by loss of control. He lost control of Marion. She had the audacity to leave him.
Despite the sentences, the pain of losing their mum is something Marion's family will live with forever.
The way I feel now is a bit empty, lost, but, you know, we're getting there. Living life for her. Just, we're not going to let it break us, or, you know, we're going to be happy, and I still sing around the kitchen and clean. Not as much as she cleans, but, you know, I'm trying. And we're getting together and we're making memories with the boys, and we just talk about her all the time.
When I think about my mum and our memories, they're always happy memories. They're always filled with a lot of laughter, a lot of fun, just having a good time. My memories are very happy times, and that's something that can't be taken away.
The team lurched from one crisis to another with an enemy that is impossible to predict. Cobra Cyber War is new Thursday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Please be aware that this program also contains themes of domestic violence.
It's unusual that a murder offence is captured on CCTV. Very harrowing.
Police boys, there's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Couldn't even recognise her. Black eyes. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
He's an animal. Really, he's destroyed my family.
They started like kicking me and punching me, and I was terrified.
We had to take a dangerous offender off the street.
He's just evil. He's took a mother away from her 5 children. That's the monster.
Ten miles south of Birmingham lies the pretty Worcestershire village of Hopwood.
Hopwood is what I would describe as a rural area, lots of country lanes.
Very peaceful and tranquil. That's the kind of thing you'd expect from this kind of place.
You've got the canal down there, you've got a couple of nice pubs. It's just lovely.
It's a very sleepy village. There's obviously not much traffic coming around here. Everyone knows everybody in the village.
They look out for each other, they can go to each other to ask for help. It's a really tight-knit community.
But the peace of this rural idyll is about to be shattered.
Emergency, which service?
Police, please.
Police emergency.
Hello, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just walking my dog up the lane at the moment. There's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Just before 6 a.m. on that morning, dog walker walking his dog in Wast Hills Lane, and the dog came across a pile of leaves. And the dog walker then discovered there was blood underneath the leaves.
I just saw a pile of blood on the road, and I thought, where's all that come from? The dog's gone to a ditch, and I thought, oh, somebody's dumped rubbish. And then I could see an hand and a leg. I thought, oh, sorry.
It is the body of a woman in her 30s.
And obviously, that prompted an emergency response from police and the ambulance service.
To find a scene like that is incredibly shocking, especially in this area.
Might have been hit by a car. I'm not sure. Can you get them as quick as you can?
Medics pronounce the woman dead, and it is deemed as a potential hit and run.
Upon receiving the report, the police attended the location and immediately set up a crime scene, preventing others from accessing the road, so that the investigations can begin into what had happened and how it had happened.
West Mercia's Detective Chief Inspector Jerry Smith heads up the investigation.
We're currently standing in Wast Hills Lane, in the actual inner cordon in the scene itself. The pool of blood was located around this area. And then what you actually had as well were drag marks in blood leading across the road, which was obviously where the body had been dragged to place it in the ditch. The body was covered in debris and vegetable matter. When I initially attended the scene, officers thought that it could have been a non-stop fatal road traffic collision.
The grim discovery becomes the talk of the village.
This must have been a huge shock for the local residents, finding out that a body had been discovered in their locality.
That kind of, concern, because this is a place where things don't happen very often, would have been high, really high level.
Everybody did talk about it, and we were all going, oh my God, was she walking? Because we used to walk down that a lot. We used to go a nice long walk down to the canal.
I was keenly aware that going forward it was highly likely to raise significant concerns within that area, particularly at that time because we didn't have an identification of the body and we didn't know what type of incident we were actually dealing with.
But investigators have their work cut out, trying to establish what actually happened and the identity of the motorist who potentially hit her, then drove off.
The rural nature of the scene obviously means that we're going to get less likelihood of CCTV evidence and witness evidence because, as you can see, there's nobody around, just causing complexities to the investigation.
The police carry out an immediate investigation. They will have spoken to witnesses at the houses nearby, knocking on doors to see if anybody had heard or seen anything at the time, as well as conducting painstaking CCTV inquiries to try and identify the movements of the deceased.
The next priority in an investigation like this is to identify the body, to work out who this woman is.
The police identified a rucksack at the scene. Inside that rucksack was a mobile phone.
Fingerprints and DNA swabs were taken from the phone, and then it was opened up, and identification details from the handset, from the SIM were taken. And then by making inquiries with the telecommunications provider, we managed to identify through our intelligence systems that it was Kerry. Kerry Owen was a 35-year-old mother of 5 children. She was initially from the Peterborough area.
The first Kerry's family hear about her death is via her boyfriend, Alan Edney.
It was 27th of May, and I sat at home, and my son received a phone call saying Kerry had died in a hit and run in Birmingham.
I was in my granddad's living room and he got the call, and then he told me. He said that your mum has passed away. Everyone was just upset and shocked.
I got a phone call and he said to me that they were out camping and she ran off and got hit by a car and the car drove off.
And he says, we was running across the farmer's field and there was a gateway. He says, I think I thought I slipped and went through the gateway, and I looked at the side of me and Kerry lay there with a hole in her head. And I see a black Peugeot 206 in the distance.
Obviously, I broke down, like, I was literally in tears. One of my sister's mates who I lived with, he broke down. He just hugged me and he goes, we're going to get justice for her one way.
Obviously, I was upset. You know, she's my friend. I've always looked out for her, and I felt let down that I couldn't protect her because I've always been there to protect her.
She was a kind-hearted person. You know, she'd do anything for anybody.
She would always look after Kyrie, who's my oldest son, buy him new clothes, feed him, change him. They would always be together.
Everyone really loved her, you know, like she was just like adorable and that.
While Kerry's family try to come to terms with the devastating news, investigators are examining the scene to try to establish what actually happened.
In the addresses nearby, some of those addresses had CCTV, and a vehicle had been seen leaving Wast Hills Lane at about 4 a.m. And relatively quickly, by attending a local address, we were able to work out that was highly likely to be somebody that lived at one of those addresses and that was going to work. We were subsequently able to find that car and just reassure ourselves there was no damage or blood or anything on that car consistent with a road traffic collision.
DCI Smith also has other concerns when he re-examines the scene.
I found it immediately unusual that anyone would have stopped in those circumstances and particularly made the effort to cover up blood and deposit the body in a ditch and then cover the body as well. The lack of any tyre marks, the lack of any vehicle debris, to me indicated that it was not a road traffic collision.
And officers speaking to local residents also suspect all is not as it seems.
During some of the initial witness trawling, people had heard voices in the road.
CCTV from a nearby address points towards the area in the lane where the voices are coming from.
It didn't cover the scene, but crucially what it did have was audio. At approximately 4:05 that morning, you start to hear voices. It's difficult to hear, but it's clear there's two people and that someone is distressed, and then gradually those voices turn into screaming. there's some significant instance of violence occurring at that time in the road, and that lasts for about 5 minutes. I wasn't dealing with a road traffic collision, and it was highly likely to be a homicide.
In Hopwood, Worcestershire, 35-year-old mother of 5, Kerry Owen, has been found dead by the roadside in mysterious circumstances. After viewing nearby CCTV just hours before her body is discovered, police now suspect Kerry was murdered as she walked along Wast Hill Lane.
You hear parents screaming, and then later on, we hear more screaming. This is particularly significant because of the gap between the screaming that you hear may indicate 2 separate attacks.
"40 metres before Kerry's final resting place, police uncover evidence of that first attack.
This is the scene of what I think could have been the initial attack site, with blood was found on the ground, and in fact a dislodged tooth was found in this area as well by the fingertip search. There was also some orange debris in the road. Officers thought it was a cigarette lighter, so straight away it became obvious there were 2 separate attack sites, 2 assaults. And that is then potentially corroborated by what you hear on the CCTV. There is a gap between the screaming, which may be consistent with an assault in one location, either Kerry moving herself or being dragged to the second location where she was finally killed.
When the post-mortem results come back, they reveal more about what happened to Kerry.
The pathologist found that Kerry had essentially been subjected to a savage beating. She had over 80 injuries on her body.
She suffered significant facial injuries. She had fractures to her nose. She had a tooth knocked out. She had a fracture to the hyoid bone in her neck. The injuries were terrible.
The final conclusion was that Kerry had died from blunt force trauma. Basically, she had been beaten to death.
We obviously had to identify her. You couldn't even recognise her. She was all swollen, she had black eyes, they'd had to shave all her hair off. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
She had a hole in her head. Obviously, I wanted to go and see her, and my niece, she was like, "Nah, don't, because it's going to scar you for life." She goes, "It's not a nice sight."
I just felt sick, you know, to think that how can somebody do that to somebody who won't even fight back? Kerry wouldn't have fought back.
The injuries are more consistent with a sustained attack. They aren't really consistent with a hit and run, so that's question marks over Alan Edney's story.
Her boyfriend's claims that she'd been hit by a black Peugeot 206 during their camping trip also don't add up.
If that happened to me, I'd be devastated. I'd be crying my eyes out. I'd be absolutely destroyed. He was so calm.
I thought it was a bit funny because I've known Kerry 21 years. Kerry doesn't do camping, you know, so I thought that seemed a bit strange.
I used to buy and sell cars and everything. I've never seen a Peugeot 206 black one in years. Must be a proper collector's car. It was unbelievable.
The last photos taken by Kerry's phone confirms the couple had indeed been camping in nearby woods. Officers seek out and find their campsite. But something else about Alan's story doesn't stack up.
Edney's account was that they had come from the campsite and for some reason decided to have a race he'd got caught in the gate, and as that happened, he'd heard the sound of a collision and Kerry being hit by a vehicle, which didn't stop. And it just doesn't make sense that they would have climbed over this gate and she'd have been hit by a car. We're now hundreds of yards from the location where Kerry's body was found. The road traffic collision just didn't stand any scrutiny.
Alan Edney basically told some of Kerry's family members he had in fact called the police and an ambulance, and he had then attended a local hospital with Kerry where she was pronounced deceased.
He describes to his grandmother actually that he's had a statement taken by a police officer who had then dropped him back.
We found no evidence of any of that at all.
With Edney now firmly in their sights as a suspect, detectives dig deeper into his history with Kerry.
Kerry Owen first met Edney in March 2020 via a dating site.
I remember her saying to me she'd met a man on the internet from Birmingham.
And within a week, she moved to Birmingham with him.
First time we went down, we met him in the town centre and he seemed lovely.
I told her to really come back to Peterborough so she could be with her family, but she said no, she met the man of her dreams, basically.
All Kerry wanted in life was to be loved, and, you know, if somebody told her they loved her, straight away Kerry would be all for that, if you know what I mean. So she was sort of a bit vulnerable when it comes around relationships.
But barely a month into the budding romance, cracks begin to show.
She phoned me and told me that he was beating her up. And that's when I asked her, you know, to come back to Peterborough to her dad's house or come to my house. But, you know, she obviously stayed there.
She stayed in contact for a couple of months, then all of a sudden the phone calls stopped, Facebook stopped. I kept texting her, are you okay, are you okay? Nothing come back. We're worrying about her. Then the next thing, Kerry's texted me, she says he's in prison.
In 2021, there was a serious incident where Kerry and Alan's mum had taken a short holiday to Blackpool, and that resulted in a serious assault where Alan assaulted Kerry and his mum.
I think she rang me, she FaceTimed me and told me that he'd just been arrested, and she showed me her face and she had some, I think, some grazes or black eye. She had been in the hospital. She told me she'd been in the hospital. She had marks on her belly because he had stamped on her belly.
So I went there. That's when she told me as well she was pregnant with his baby.
For a man to assault his own mother and also assault his partner, especially when she's pregnant, kind of really paints the picture of the kind of man that Edney was, with this violent streak that ran through him.
I was obviously really shocked and I was confused as well because he was obviously acting so nice when we went to Birmingham. But I was confused.
She was still sticking up for him. When you're in them kind of relationships, it's kind of hard to get out.
Edney is jailed for 6 months for the assault on Kerry and his mother.
She stayed in contact while he was in prison. It was like we'd got our niece back and the kids had got their mum back. Then all of a sudden the contact stopped again.
Unfortunately, Kerry did maintain contact with Alan when he was in prison. But when Alan was released from prison, he rekindled his relationship with Kerry, and they in fact lived together. He assaulted her again, and he was in fact on bail not to contact her.
Detectives uncover more worrying incidents involving Edney.
I went down there on bonfire night and we all went round there, we done fireworks, and Alan got very drunk. And my mum had told him to stop drinking. He obviously kicked off about it, and then Alan started screaming at my mum, calling her all different names. He was verbally violent to her. So we were like, okay, we're going home.
It is the last time Yasmin sees her mum alive.
I feel bad for leaving her, but I had to put my kid first in that situation. I can't expect my kid to be around that.
Having delved into Edney's history, police investigating Kerry's death make a decision.
The police, having conducted their initial investigations, it became clear that Edney was the person who they wanted to arrest for this offence.
Once we'd identified a location for him, an address on the nearby Hawksley estate that was within walking distance of the crime scene, was in fact his grandmother's address. When officers attended Alan's nan's address, Alan was present and he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Police investigating the murder of mother of 5 Kerry Owen in Hopwood, Worcestershire, have arrested her partner, Alan Edney.
Edney was arrested on the evening of the 27th of May 2022. His family were entirely surprised at his arrest, given that they believed that Kerry Owen had died in a road traffic collision.
He didn't make any admissions. He, in fact, made no comment to all questions put to him during the interview process. But he did make comments outside of the process, indicating that he had an alibi and that he wasn't responsible for the offence.
Word spreads throughout the village and to Kerry's family back in Peterborough.
The police came round, my granddad's, and basically said Alan Edney has been arrested on suspicion of murder. It all made sense then, like it all adds up why he was lying, why people had been told different stories and stuff like that, and we all had to do our statements.
Meanwhile, police uncover more evidence about Edney's behaviour.
Our investigations into Alan Edney's history demonstrated that he had a significant history of domestic abuse on intimate partners, but also on his family members. There seemed to be a pattern where alcohol was a significant trigger for that offending behaviour. And we found a number of incidences in Alan Edney's past of significant domestic violence. One of those occurred on New Year's Day, 2018.
I was celebrating with friends. I came back and I heard my friend screaming. So I've gone all the way up, and she's opened up the door, bright red-faced. I went, "You're right." She went, "Yeah, just, like, come in." And then I was dragged into the bedroom. They started, like, kicking me and punching me, and I was on the floor. I did not do anything for him to do anything. It was just automatic kicking and punching. He was drunk. He'd been strangling her with a broom. You could physically see the broom was on the bed. At one stage I could get up so I could move because he went after her again. So I thought, this is my easy way to get out. But I went the wrong way. And I went towards the window.
The woman claims Edney then pushed her halfway out of the window as her friend looked on in horror.
Next minute I know is I'm looking down. Well, I was literally near enough out the window. and she literally dragged him back to pull me back in. I'd come back and he started kicking me again, but he was kicking me in the side, in the stomach, in the legs. My blood was all over the floor. My friend helped me try and get away. She shouted out, "She's pregnant." He went, "I don't care, another one can be dead then."
Edney's victim flees for her life. In March 2018, Edney pleaded guilty to assault and was jailed for 3.5 years.
To carry out an attack of that ferocity suggests a man with a serious violent tendency and where really there are no holds barred.
Mentally destroyed me. Physically destroyed me. I had to run from where I lived. Literally, I couldn't stay there. He was evil.
Following the attack, his victim posted warnings about Edney online, prompting his now girlfriend Kerry Owen to reach out.
Kerry then contacted me and my friend. We persuaded her. He'd beat her up. But because she was pregnant with his son, she was like, "Oh, I still love him." Next thing I know is that she's dead. And that absolutely killed me. Because nobody listened. This could have been prevented. I swear it could have been prevented.
With Edney in police custody being questioned over Kerry's death, her family visit the scene of her murder.
So we stopped the car and then we went and laid, you know, like the flowers, but you could still see Kerry's blood on the road, and that's what got me, is like I had to walk away. Felt like she was there kind of thing.
And this man and lady pulled up in a car, and I said, "Do you know what?" I said, "Whoever found her must be destroyed." And this bloke says, "I didn't want to tell you, I'm the man who found her." And basically destroyed him.
What kind of person could just leave someone laid in the road? She's just been left in the middle of nowhere.
This Alan Edney, he's ruined everybody. You know, from the person who found her to our family. Really, he's destroyed my family.
With Edney refusing to answer police questions, detectives need to build a case against him. They continue trawling CCTV from local residents to piece together his movements leading up to the murder.
The CCTV inquiries were able to map the movements of Edney and Kerry Owen. It showed that they'd been together in the afternoon of the 26th of May.
For some reason, Alan and Kerry had decided to go camping in a wooded area near Wast Hills Lane. They had gone to the wooded area earlier in the daytime when it was light to set up the campfire, and there's pictures on Kerry's phone of a makeshift shelter and a lot of wood stacked up. They had then gone back to Alan's nan's address, had a meal, spent some time there, before then making their way back up Wast Hills Lane to the campsite. And there's in fact some CCTV footage of them making that journey around 10 p.m. They spent 3.5 to 4 hours at the campsite, and there's a number of photographs on Kerry's phone of Alan at the campsite with a very large fire. He's likely to have consumed a lot of alcohol on that night, and there was evidence of alcohol being consumed at that location. For some reason unknown, they decided to leave the campsite in the early hours of the morning.
At around 4 a.m, the sound of an argument breaks out between the couple on CCTV. Then Kerry is heard, fighting for her life.
It's a sustained attack for several minutes, and then it's silence.
Police then make a breakthrough. Their suspect is spotted on CCTV in broad daylight, alone.
Around 50 minutes later, the CCTV captured Edney leaving the locality of the scene.
Wearing a distinctive T-shirt that he's shown wearing on Kerry's mobile phone.
He's wiping his hands and he looks a bit agitated, he looks quite erratic, and he kind of walks down the lane, then turns off.
A search of Edney's home seals his fate.
When officers searched the address, there was a particularly significant find. The clothing that he'd been wearing on the night, the distinctive T-shirt with the motive on the front, tracksuit bottoms and trainers, which we could see on the CCTV video and also on Kerry's mobile phone photograph. That was found in a bin bag behind a cupboard in the kitchen area of the address.
The bag of clothes appear to have blood on them.
The police submitted the clothing that had been hidden by Edney for DNA analysis, and the blood on that clothing was found to be Kerry Owens.
Everything is starting to come together for the police in their investigation.
3 days after Alan Edney was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Kerry Owen, the Crown Prosecution Service made the decision to charge him with murder.
In Hopwood, Worcestershire, Alan Edney has been charged with the murder of his girlfriend, mother of 5, Kerry Owen. But the hard graft doesn't stop for the investigators.
Even though Alan Edney had been charged with murder, I'd say that the period leading up to a trial does involve an element of nervousness on behalf of the investigation team. There's a lot more detailed work that has to be completed to get the case ready for trial.
The police will still carry on trying to gather as much evidence. They're still pursuing anything they can to really kind of seal this case.
We had employed a number of forensic experts in the case. One of those was an odontologist. By ensuring a detailed fingertip search of the scene, we'd managed to find a tooth, and the odontologist was able to mechanically fit that tooth into Kerry's jaw to show that her tooth had been knocked out during the assault. Linear marks were found on Kerry's face. I was concerned that could have meant there was a weapon that had missing, because we were never able to get any support from a forensic expert that Alan Edney's wear was what had left those marks on her face. But ultimately there was not any evidence of a weapon being used, and it's likely that he'd used his hands and feet as his weapons.
The CPS and the police think it's built up a really strong case against Edney, but it's now over to the lawyers and for the case to go to court.
I was in a really bad way. My head was like all over. It was like I couldn't sleep, because it was like, is he gonna get found like guilty? Is he gonna or is he gonna walk? I didn't know what was gonna happen and that.
Kerry's family come face to face once again with her killer.
I was nervous, and then obviously during the court case, I was even more nervous. He was just sitting there, giving me like evil looks.
I just stared at him. You know, if looks could kill, he'd have been dead. Just to let him know, like, he might have took my niece's life, but he's not took the rest of ours. Do you know what I mean?
My sister, he was laughing in her face, in the court, like he just didn't care.
There was just no remorse or sadness whatsoever when this is a woman who's had your baby. He had no remorse for what he'd done.
The court hears the harrowing evidence of Kerry's last moments.
They did say, we're about to play it, if you would like to leave the room, then leave.
The last time I ever heard my niece screaming for her life was on that man's CCTV. So, it's horrible, really. And then you get told in the court he was still kicking her and beating her after she was dead, basically. So he must have beat her to a pulp.
His defence at court was effectively that he admitted responsibility for Kerry's death, but that was on the grounds of provocation and diminished responsibility. Edney's defence was essentially that Kerry had brought up on the night issues around him being abused himself as a child, and then that had provoked him into acting the way he did.
Edney blames his brutal attack on mental illness and a loss of control.
The psychiatrist agreed that Edney suffered from a mental abnormality. However, we were able to prove that that abnormality of mind did not contribute towards his behaviour on that day. Part of the evidence put forward was the previous assaults upon both Kerry Owen and other partners. That helped us prove to the jury that Edney knew what he was doing when he killed Kerry Owen.
The prosecution also outlines how calm and collected Edney was in the aftermath of the crime, and how he spent time covering his tracks.
At that time of year in May, leaf matter would have been readily available. He used some of that to cover up a significant pooling of blood in the middle of the road, but then he also dragged Kerry's body into a deep ditch nearby, deposited her in there, and then covered her with a significant amount of vegetation which he took from undergrowth nearby. It was really important for the prosecution to paint a detailed picture of the web of lies, the accounts that he provided to his own family and Kerry's family, and we didn't find any evidence to show that Kerry was likely to have provoked him to violence in that way.
In fact, Edney hadn't lost his control. He knew exactly what he was doing.
It was in the hands of the jury from that point. I think there's always an element of nervousness.
You do not know how the jury view the case, so naturally there is an apprehension. The jury unanimously found Edney guilty of murder.
We were all well happy. We were all jumping up and down on the seating area. We were all bouncing up and down on there, shouting. We were all happy.
I think the overwhelming emotion was one of relief that we had delivered justice for Kerry Owen, her family, and also to help to protect the wider public from Edney.
Alan Edney is jailed for life with a minimum of 20 years.
He is, in my view, a significant danger to women, and I think that result protects other women from potentially becoming similar victims.
It ensures that Edney will be behind bars for a very long time.
Justice was served, but I don't think the sentence was hard enough. It's basically probably destroyed our family. The man's evil.
He's took a mother away from her 5 children. That's the monster. Hopefully he'll never get out. You know, the best thing to him to do is die in jail.
The murder is forever etched in the memory of the village of Hopwood.
It will have a lasting impact on this community. It's such a horrendous crime on their doorstep in such what is otherwise a lovely place to live. And that will be with them for a long time.
For the people who live there, you know, this is kind of a blot on their history and something that I don't think any of them will forget.
But it's Kerry's family in Peterborough who were left to pick up the pieces.
When someone's took away from you instantly, so young, it's so hard, I think, to carry on.
There was some harsh moments, you know, where I tried taking my life. It's like I just wanted to like be with her because I basically like lost her, and not just like a sister. It's like a best, you know, like a best friend, and like I just like miss her and that.
So it's sad, really. It's sad for them all. She's, you know, missed by everyone.
She never got to meet my youngest kids. My kids can't now grow up the way they were growing up. Now it all has to change because she can't be there.
Even the grandchildren, they always look in stars and say, Nanny. It's just heartbreaking, really.
There'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston. Police discovered a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead. It was clearly a very violent, cold-blooded killing.
It was scary, not something you expect to happen on your doorstep.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
We thought, is this to do with this gang-related thing? They'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the heart of the Lincolnshire countryside is the thriving market town of Boston.
Boston's a town that's steeped in history. At one stage, it was the second largest port in the UK to Liverpool. You've got such things as the Guild Hall.
You've got a nice Boston stamp. This big church, which is very beautiful architecture. You can see from anywhere. If you get lost, just to look for a Boston stamp.
Because it's rural, you've got plenty of nice open spaces. And then you've got a town with local people in it, local trades.
It was a small village and now it's a town. And they're very lovely people, very laid back. They have a very Bostonian humour about them.
Anybody that comes past, it's always good morning. It's not like city life where they just ignore each other.
No, we'll be sat on the doorstep having a cup of tea. An old woman or someone comes past, you're like, all right, good morning.
Yeah, you don't know him from Adam, but you just say good morning.
Yeah.
With its surrounding farmland, Boston has long been a draw for those looking for work.
Boston is essentially the vegetable breadbasket of the United Kingdom. About a third of the fresh fruit and vegetable comes from that area in the whole of the UK.
Farmers need, packhouses need X amount of casual labour. Boston doesn't hold that amount of casual labour, so that labour has to come in from elsewhere. And that's always been the case all the way back.
In recent years, the town has been transformed by the arrival of workers from across Europe.
Boston's changed incredibly over the last 20 years with the migration from the European Union. It's had the highest amount of migration for anywhere in the country. The first wave came from Portugal, but gradually as more Eastern European countries came into the EU, it was predominantly Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and then Poland, and latterly Bulgaria and Romania.
Many European people here. There's lots of factory and field work, jobs around, many cabbages. That's where you got sprouts for Christmas. So we are not that bad.
33-year-old Marina Urte moved to Boston in 2007 to start a new life for herself.
Marina came from Latvia. She found work at a fruit packaging plant, and I think she was fairly popular there and well-liked.
She was more crazier than me. No, she was a lovely girl. She was beautiful, quite popular. When she started her work, she'd been offered higher position than other people. She was like a leader.
She was known as being quite frank and quite honest, but also a hard worker.
She wanted jobs done right. She would tell you where to go, what to do and how to do. And if obviously somebody was doing something wrong, she wouldn't be quiet. Quite perfectionist.
We were working together in the same factories, and we would go out partying sometimes, but I would say most of our time we would spend at the job. Me and Marina, we were similar in terms of career progression and temperament and wanting to improve, earn more money and create more comfortable life for us.
Marina had settled into Boston, and with a steady job and a new group of friends, she met 33-year-old Gytis Griskavikas.
She met Gytis in 2009. He came from Lithuania.
He used to work with us at the factory as well. He was a very nice, intelligent guy, very friendly, very caring. And I just remember that he turned up at our door, taking her out somewhere. They were really happy, they were really in love.
And they married quite quickly, I think, in 2010.
They have a nice wedding, and she have a nice dress, and it was like a fairy tale, like a big love story. They loved each other, and they was really in love and happy.
He was flying, and he had all the sparks in his eyes, and Marina, so yeah, they were in love.
And it wasn't long before Marina and Gytis decided to start a family together. In November 2010, Marina gave birth to their baby daughter.
She was very good mommy. She adored her little girl. She was always calling her little princess, always.
Gytis, likewise, was also a good husband and a good dad. They were a normal, happy family.
Sadly, the relationship between Marina and Gytis didn't last. But they both agreed to raise their daughter together whilst living separately. And as Marina continued to impress at her job, she began to think big for her future.
She was always taking care of flowers, and she always dreamed to have some little shop with many different kinds, and she would sell them for special occasions like weddings or big birthdays.
But in the summer of 2016, everything changes when one of Marina's neighbours calls an emergency engineer, believing there's been a gas leak.
The next door neighbour smelt something under the stairs.
But when the engineer arrives, he suspects the smell is coming from Marina's flat and looks through her letterbox. They spot a smouldering fire and call the fire brigade immediately.
Fire rescue. Oh, hello. I've been called to the downstairs flat, but we can smell smoke from upstairs, and there's fire damage to the stairs. Right, okay.
I remember learning there'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston. I don't think there was any obvious sign of a fire from outside, but certainly the neighbours were aware that it had been a fire.
The lady from downstairs thinks there'll be somebody inside upstairs. but we can't get up the stairs because they're too damaged.
OK, we have got fire crews on the way to it, OK.
Firefighters force their way into the flat and put out the smouldering fire, whilst checking if anyone is home. At first it appears empty, but as the crew enter the bathroom, they make a shocking discovery.
They find a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead, obviously by strange circumstances, in a bath, no water in the bath, covered in soot, with a hose on top of her. You know, you think, good gracious, you know, how on earth has this happened?
Police are immediately called to the scene.
I want to know what the cause of death is roughly at that stage. So is it a homicide? Is it suspicious? I mean, just because a body's been found in the bath doesn't necessarily mean it's suspicious. It could have been an accidental fire or something like that.
Police quickly established that the dead woman is Marina Urte. It becomes obvious she has been brutally attacked, with horrific injuries to her face and body. A murder investigation is immediately launched and officers secure the scene.
It's all about scene preservation. The scene can tell you a phenomenal amount, and the last thing that you need is that scene corrupting.
News of Marina's death quickly spreads through the street.
We all gets moved out of the flat, and then next hour or so, turns out she's been murdered in a battle. We never, ever thought for a second that there was a murder. We just generally thought there was a fire. Not something you expect to happen on your doorstep. It's just crazy.
In the quaint market town of Boston, Lincolnshire, the usual tranquility has been disturbed by the sirens of fire engines, and neighbours on Elizabeth Road are stunned to learn that not only was the fire set deliberately, but that 33-year-old Marina Urte has been brutally murdered.
The residents were shocked to learn that it was a murder because initially, like everyone else, they thought it was a fire.
Everybody was in shock. You just didn't know how to get your head around it.
There was always a police car parked just there on the side.
Constant flashes, weren't
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Forensic cameras, it was just unreal, wasn't it?
It's just not what we expected at all.
It is a quiet area, so for something like this just happened, like, I think it did shake everybody up, to be honest.
When a crime like that hits Boston, it's very painful to hear. Some Bostonian people, they do feel afraid, they feel afraid going out. It just brings this grey shadow over your community.
As Marina has been senselessly attacked in her home for no apparent reason, the community is on high alert.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
It was scary. There was always that worry of somebody coming back. They could have potentially took more lives.
It isn't long before Marina's family and friends learn of the brutal attack on their loved one.
Someone texted me saying that the fire brigade and police is there, so she's been killed.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe. It was my birthday, so obviously from very high happiness I went in deep sadness and proper shock. I thought, what? Is that really possible?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to establish a timeline of Marina's last known movements.
There's all sorts of inquiries that need to be made. We would have people immediately looking for CCTV in the area. We'd have people very, very quickly knocking on doors to find out who's been seen in the area, who hasn't. We need to find out when this happened, because that's the starting point, isn't it? When was she last seen, and who was she last seen by? Also, where she worked, who she would normally work with, when should she have been in at work last?
Officers speak to Marina's colleagues at the fruit packing factory where she worked and narrow the time frame on her last known movements.
Police discovered Marina hadn't turned in for work 5 o'clock that morning. So clearly, whatever had happened before that time. And that's absolutely key part of the investigation.
Back at the scene, police and fire experts examine the cause of the fire and quickly establish it had been purposely set after Marina had died.
The early forensic evidence showed that a fire had been set in the flat, but it didn't take properly, so the house wasn't badly damaged by fire.
The fire didn't really take, I think it was just slow burning. But if they'd done a good job on the fire, it could have just took this whole block. That was scary.
With the fire having been set after the attack, detectives speculate whether Marina's killer had tried to destroy evidence at the scene.
They won't have known if they left any forensic evidence there. They won't have known if they left any fingerprints there. They won't have known for sure that someone didn't see them either going or coming back.
Forensic experts are called in. They need to examine the scene to find any clues that might point to Marina's attacker.
When we got there, it was obvious that I wasn't able to do my job. The reason I couldn't do it is because the fire that was started on the stairs had produced a certain excessive amount of soot throughout the flat. And the whole flat was covered in a thin layer of soot, which meant you couldn't see the blood. So at that point, after a brief look around, and we did locate some bloodstains, but it was obvious that the extent of that was much more than what we could see. We decided to go home and have a team of people come in and de-soot the scene, and then us to go back after that process has been done.
Forensics must wait until the thick layer of soot is meticulously cleared before they can work. But detectives do manage to question Marina's ex-husband, Gitas. He says he hasn't seen her, but reveals some information which leads investigators to look deeper into Marina's personal life. And they uncover some disturbing connections to some violent people.
Following the ending of a relationship with Gitas in 2015, she'd formed a new relationship. And it was quickly discovered that she had been involved in a very recent trial at Lincoln Crown Court. She had been charged with perverting the course of justice after her new partner was involved in a violent attack on another group of East Europeans.
The man in question is 42-year-old Alexandra Kudryasov.
Alexander, he worked at the same factory as well. Alexander was involved in what's it called, criminal activity and deviant behaviors and everything. He's got quite a rough background.
Police found out that a new boyfriend had recently been sent to prison for 18 years for grievous bodily harm, dreadful attacking involving knives. And Marina herself had been acquitted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice in providing him with an alibi, only a matter of days before her body was found. Clearly, it was an obvious line of inquiry that her death might be something to do with those circumstances.
Police want to know, was Marina's involvement in a gang dispute anything to do with her death? Could this have been a revenge attack?
One theory that the police would have been exploring is that maybe one members of the group that were the victims would exact revenge on Marina's partner, and the fact that he'd been convicted and was now out of the way meant that, of course, there was no one to protect Marina at the time.
Police explore the possibility Marina had become mixed up with a bad crowd through her relationship with Alexander. The theory of a revenge attack takes hold, and the safety of Marina's friends and family becomes a police priority.
The fact that a group of East European men have been very, very badly injured by another group of East European men, obviously down in Boston, there would have been tensions between the various people involved, the various families.
Clearly, one of the concerns for the police initially was the welfare of the child, and then the other family members as well.
As police make sure Marina's loved ones are kept safe, post-mortem results arrive which offer clues to her attacker.
Marina had suffered traumatic brain injury, and she had fractured eye sockets and other injuries.
We know that it wasn't a knife used. It could have been done with fists, kicking, or a blunt instrument.
It was clearly a very violent and cold-blooded killing.
And with the scene now cleared of soot from the fire, forensic results arrive, which further paints a horrific picture.
What we found was a large pool of blood in the living room with smears around it, and there were small spots of blood radiating from it, indicating that there's been impacts in that area, probably into Marina herself. I suspect that she's gone into the living room for whatever reason, been hit, gone down almost straight away, and then been assaulted on the floor by punching or kicking or with a blunt instrument.
Forensic results also show bloodied track marks from the living room to the bathroom.
The two track marks is where her heels were in contact with the ground as she's been dragged across the landing and into the bathroom. In the bathroom, there were spatters of blood around the bath and on the floor to indicate that she'd been further assaulted in that area. Her body was found naked in the bath. There was no blood-stained clothing, so when it happened, she was most likely naked. And the pathologist said that Maria had actually been drowned by having the shower head forced into her mouth, and it was that which actually killed her in the end, was the cause of death.
But who could have carried out such an horrific attack? Had Marina become sucked into a gangland dispute and paid the ultimate price for it?
We'd heard that she had gone to court to do with this gang-related thing.
Yeah.
We thought she'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the Lincolnshire town of Boston, police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old Marina Urte, who was found in her own home beaten and drowned in the bath. Her boyfriend, Alexander Kudryasov, is in prison, serving an 18-year sentence for a vicious attack during a gangland dispute. Whilst he is ruled out as a suspect, there are suspicions that Marina has been murdered in a gangland revenge attack.
After it happened, we used to see this really spruced up black car coming past. We kept thinking, oh, is this to do with, like, this gang-related thing? That's pretty much everybody's first thoughts, wasn't it?
But police are keeping an open mind.
It's the age-old adage, ABC of investigating. Accept nothing, believe no one, and check absolutely everything. If it was anything to do with the grievous bodily harm trial and Marina being acquitted of conspiracy and almost a revenge attack by perhaps those people that had been the victims in the first place, one would expect it to be almost tit for tat. Revenge is usually about, I'm going to give you what you gave to me. That's what revenge is. Revenge doesn't normally extend to attacking a defenseless woman in her own home, viciously and violently over a prolonged period of time. That, to me, was not a revenge attack.
Police also suspect that the lack of a forced entry points to a different explanation.
That immediately means to me, this is personal. That would be my first thought there. This is not a random attack. This isn't a burglary gone wrong or anything like that. This is personal, for some reason or other. Whoever did this to Marina knew her, and Marina knew them and had let them in the house.
With this latest theory, police look closely at Marina's inner circle.
One of the key elements is always to find out who saw the victim alive last.
Police would have been looking to question those who were closely connected to Marina. That would have been her former partner and her former husband, also her sister who lived nearby. As every police officer knows, most murders are committed by people known to the victim, so it would have been their primary avenue of inquiry.
As Marina and her ex-husband Gytis had shared custody of their daughter, police question him about the last time he saw her.
Under questioning, Gytis did disclose his movements on the night and day before the murder. He disclosed that he'd been celebrating his birthday.
He immediately said, yeah, Marina had come to his house. They'd then gone to a supermarket and bought some whiskey, and then gone back to her flat.
This would have been late in the evening into the early hours of the next day. And he said that he left Marina's flat at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that when he left, she was fine.
They had a pleasant evening. They'd had a few drinks, but there was nothing else. He was saying, it's not me.
With Gytis admitting to being with Marina on the night of the murder, but claiming to have left on good terms at 2 a.m., investigators have little else to link him to the murder.
That he'd said that he'd been at the flat the night before. That poses actually an interesting dilemma for a senior investigating officer. Is what do you do with that? It's only suspicion. There is no hard evidence. You are hoping you're going to find some hard evidence through maybe forensic examination of the scene, CCTV, or anything like that, but that takes a long time.
Even without evidence against Gytis, police need to act fast in case he is in any way connected to the crime.
As the senior investigating officer, it's your decision whether to arrest a suspect, and not only whether to arrest a suspect at that time, when you do it and under what circumstances. The senior investigating officer in this case took the view that it was the most advantageous way for the investigation was to make an early arrest.
Gytis Griskevicius is arrested on suspicion of the murder of his ex-wife Marina.
It won't have been an easy decision. There would have been a train of thought, undoubtedly, about, well, there's no evidence here that he's involved. There will have been opinions within senior officers, probably more senior than the SIO in this case, that he shouldn't have been arrested. We would know that we'd only be able to keep him in custody a maximum of 24 hours, and if no evidence came forward during that period of time, he'd have to be released. So it's not a straightforward decision.
With the time ticking against them, police further question Gytis under caution.
He gave the same story as he'd done before he'd been arrested, that he'd been there with Marina voluntarily, he'd left around 2 o'clock in the morning, and she was fine when he left her.
But with Gytis now in custody, police can delve deeper into his life to find any evidence that might connect him to Marina's murder.
Once we arrest him, the purpose of that is to enable the police to search the house, search his vehicle, search him, examine him for any injuries.
On closer examination, officers notice an injury on Gytis's right hand, which he explains was caused by an accident. Despite the suspicious injury and Gytis being the last known person to see Marina alive, the police have no further evidence. And Gytis has been in custody for almost 24 hours.
One has to make a decision. Have we got enough evidence here to charge him? Clearly they hadn't.
Gytis is released on bail.
The news obviously left question marks for people in the area. Was this the man? Had they caught the killer? Or was the perpetrator still at large?
Police now move their focus away from Gitis and cast the net wider. They trawl through hours of CCTV across the local area in hopes to find anything that might lead them to Marina's killer.
They would have trawled hundreds of hours of CCTV.
CCTV examination is an art form. It isn't just a straightforward process. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it methodically. Some of the bigger police forces these days have dedicated teams whose sole job it is to do that.
And after hours of examination, police find footage from the early hours of the 20th of May, the day Marina was thought to have been murdered. And it places Gitis back in the frame.
They managed to find him on CCTV.
The footage shows Gitis running towards Marina's house at 9:30 p.m. Rather than he had claimed, heading there with Marina after a party at his. Then, 2 hours later at 11:30 p.m, Marina and Gitis are seen together at a nearby supermarket. And then, crucially, he is caught on camera returning to his house much later than 2 a.m, the time he told police.
So he had not left Marina's home at 2 o'clock in the morning and gone straight home. He was seen around 7:30 in the morning, and I believe he got back to his own premises around about 8 o'clock in the morning. So straight away they know he wasn't where he said he was, when he said he was there. The story he gave from the outset was a pack of lies.
The CCTV footage disproves Gitis' story and places him near to the scene on the morning of the murder. But the police still need more evidence to strengthen their case.
The police would then start thinking, well, how can we bolster this circumstantial evidence?
The police then begin to find other pieces of evidence that link him to the murder. A pair of his shorts were found in his washing machine, which he was seen to be wearing on CCTV.
And lo and behold, no blood was found on the shorts or anything like that. But the police would then say, well, where's the hoodie that he was wearing? Where are the T-shirt that he was wearing? Where's his footwear? Where are his socks? None of which was ever found. The fact that he couldn't account for that, again, just adds to the circumstantial evidence.
Gitis' phone is seized and searched, which raises further suspicion.
They found he had inadvertently wiped all the data off his phone.
The police believe Gitis deliberately wiped his phone to hide incriminating messages. But with the only evidence being circumstantial, and forensic results from the scene showing no strong link to Gitis being the killer, will it be enough to charge him for murder? Or will the theory of a gang-related revenge attack for the crimes of her boyfriend hold the truth to the killing? Lincolnshire police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old mum Marina Urte. And although they have circumstantial evidence that links her ex-husband Gitis Griskevicius to the crime, they are lacking forensic evidence. Meanwhile, her new boyfriend is serving 18 years in prison for a violent assault on a rival gang, and there's a theory Marina could have been killed in a revenge attack. Then the police make an announcement. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided to send the case to trial. And it's Gitis they believe is the killer.
Following the CCTV and other pieces of evidence, Gitis was rearrested and charged with the murder.
Gitis pleads not guilty. And with the evidence being mainly circumstantial, the police have their work cut out to prove there is enough to convict him.
Certainly the lead-up to a trial for murder involves a phenomenal amount of work. Making sure the evidence is presented in the correct fashion, making sure witnesses turn up. My feeling at the beginning of every murder trial I've been involved in was a fear of being perceived to have let the victim and the victim's family down. They are completely beholding upon you as an individual to bring some justice for their loved one.
In March 2017, the trial into Marina's murder begins at Lincoln Crown Court. And as Marina's friends and family enter the courtroom, they come face to face with her alleged killer.
When I came in, he looked at me with the eyes full of almost tears, and he looked at me as if I didn't do it.
As the trial begins, Marina's close friends reveal to the court details of her relationship with Gytis.
I remember she came to me when she was already heavily pregnant, and she was complaining that she's put on so much weight and Gytis is not happy anymore because she's not in the same shape as before. So I did notice that something was off. Why would you judge your wife for being a bit overweight when she's carrying your child?
And as time went by, the relationship continued to break down.
Then Gytis stopped investing into the family, doing anything around the house. And she would work and she would take all overtimes. So sometimes she would go weeks without a day off. And she would mention to him, maybe you should work more, or maybe you should at least wash the dishes. Then he would turn it back on her and humiliate her in terms of the weight or how she looks.
Marina then began to consider a life away from her husband.
She said to me that she wants a real man who'd take care of her and she would feel loved and cared for.
And in 2015, Marina broke off the relationship. And it wasn't long before she met her new partner, Alexander.
Marina was very happy. She said that I finally feel like a woman and I finally feel like I've been cared for. He gave me a perfume, and she said that over all these years with Gytis, he never gave her anything like that. She felt so much appreciated.
And friends revealed to the court that Gytis did not take Marina's new relationship well.
Piskevicius was still besotted with Marina. They'd split acrimoniously, but he still harboured a desire to get back with her. And he hated the fact that she was now with someone else.
He was described as being very jealous about the new boyfriend.
I met with him a few times on the street, and he said, how could she leave him? Because he's so good in bed. So he was not even thinking about the quality of life. He was raging about if his size is larger than his, how could she swap me for someone else?
But when Marina was arrested for perverting the course of justice, Gytis decides to use their daughter as leverage to get her back.
When police come up and arrested her, she didn't have a passport, she lost the job, and she didn't have a place to live. She lost everything, and in that moment, he got the girl.
She was praying and hoping that everything was gonna work out so she could then finally reunite with her daughter.
When she was fully acquitted of any wrongdoing, Marina asked to be reunited with her daughter. But Gytis refused.
I told him that you probably ought to allow Marina see the child, at least under the supervision of social workers in the children's center once a week for a few hours. She's probably missing her mother, and he was absolutely reluctant to do that, and he mentioned that we don't even mention mother's name in the house. Her girl was not allowed to pronounce her name in front of him.
He was sending her nasty messages about the girl, like no money, no honey, asking for money. Then he was taking girl out from the country, which she supposed not to do, and then posting in a Facebook saying, oh, hello, we are here. That was very nasty.
And things only got worse for Marina.
Marina had made all sorts of complaints against Griskevicius. She couldn't prove any of them. I think her vehicle had been damaged, she'd had a pedal bike stolen. She didn't know that it was him for sure, but she thought it really was, and it frightened her. There were a couple of occasions when she went to the police because he was seen filming her on his mobile phone, arriving at her house unannounced, and it spooked her to such an extent she went to the police.
I think Marina had confided in certain friends that she was worried that Gytis was stalking her.
She rings me one day, she says, he was standing on the corner of the street looking at the house.
However, in the last few days of Marina's life, hers and Gytis' relationship seemed to rekindle.
They restarted the communication. She rang me and she was so happy to say, oh, you don't know what just happened. I will see the child soon and he's talking to me in a nice way. And she was willing to resolve the conflict for her, for the daughter, and for him, for Gytis even. Just before the day, she rang me and she was very excited. And she said, he said that he loves me and he wants to get back. He's the father of my child. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And he wants to come over. He wants to celebrate his birthday with me. And I did tell her, do not meet him on your own.
Griskevicius was still besotted with Marina. I think he saw an opportunity there to say, right, I'm the father of your child. This is my birthday. Let's celebrate together, give it another go, and rekindle our marriage.
Back in the courtroom, it appears with only circumstantial evidence, Gytis could still walk free. But then a new witness takes to the stand and flips the case on its head.
This individual contacted the police and said, this guy admitted to me what he'd done. He admitted to me that he'd murdered Marina, and then he admitted that he'd set fire to the premises. And I'm prepared to give evidence to that effect.
After a grueling 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Gytis Griskevicius is found guilty of Marina Urte's murder. He is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years in prison.
The guy came and gave his evidence, and obviously the jury took it on board, and ultimately, with that and with all the circumstantial evidence, unanimously convicted him of murder. He's got to spend 23 years in jail before he even becomes eligible for parole. That's a long time by anyone's book. But you know, he committed one of the most horrific crimes you can imagine. On a defenseless mother of his own child, my view is that he deserves every one of those 23 years.
But why did Gytis decide to kill Marina? On that fateful night on the 20th of May 2016.
I think it was about the fact that she was shunning his advances. Even though a new boyfriend was going to be in prison for 18 years, she still wanted to stick by him. He couldn't bear the thought of that. And I think he thought, well, if I can't have you, no one else can.
I think Gytis was jealous and had been humiliated by the new relationship, and that was his motive for the murder.
He'd taken the poor woman, battered and beaten, from one part of the flat to another, where he attacked her again, bundled her into a bath, and then drowned her with a hose. I mean, how callous and calculating can he get?
And for Marina's neighbours, her killing still haunts them to this day.
I always get the question, did you not hear anything? I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm like, so wish I did. It was in my mind for a very long time, thinking, why the hell could I not just hear anything? And then maybe we could have given her some hope. No matter how much danger I'd be in, I would have busted through the door and tried to help. 100%. If I'd have heard anything, I'd have gone straight in there and tried to help her. Even though I'd be putting myself at danger, I'd still help her, because nobody deserves to lose life like that.
And for Marina's friends and family, with the case behind them, they are slowly coming to terms with a life without her.
The biggest thing I miss about Marina is her liveliness. She was very, very positive girl, full with ideas, full with life.
I miss everything about her because I don't have anyone similar to her. She was a very good friend, and in my difficult situations, when I'm so upset and I'm so down, I know that she would be the person to turn to. She would just tell me, everything's gonna be all right. Don't worry about anything. Everything's gonna be perfect. And she had so much power in these words that I would straight away feel better. Yeah.
Stranger danger is rare but not impossible. The chilling Murdered at First Sight is new Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
In the heart of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and there's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans. So we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. There are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincil Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground. It does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincil Bank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds, and because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university is getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Mingzi's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingzi's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingzi?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingzi Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it's basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lived across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingzi Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student, she'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people are scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened, was the public at risk.
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Mingzi Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, but you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingzi had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything? In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their main way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingzi's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingzi's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with the blunt instruments repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingzi's death.
A post-mortem found Mingsi's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingsi disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingsi's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingsi disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingsi. We know that because Mingsi's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out of the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingsi and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingsi's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingsi's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingsi could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingsi, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Sang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Sang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingsi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area, where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Sang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingsi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingsi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingsi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingsi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingsi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingsi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sinsel Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingsi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingsi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal, so, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control because it's such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Mingsi Yang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early, and he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingsi's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sinsel Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingsi's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sinsel Bank area on the morning of Mingsi's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingsi's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingzi's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingzi's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingzi matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingzi's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingzi's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingzi's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m, around 3 hours before Mingzi's body was discovered. Detectives analysed the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingzi's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements, and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wai Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, Police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingsi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingsi's home in Sincil Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist and the CCTV showed quite clearly with the times involved that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle in the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingsi's address, killed Mingsi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingsi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Sang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Sang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingsi Yang.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingsi.
As well as the traces of Mingsi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Sang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low-power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingsi. So, from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Sang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingsi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wai Sang in Lincoln, in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Tsang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
"33-year-old Wai Hong Sang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingzi Yang, in the Sinsel Bank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Tsang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingzi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Tsang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Tsang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence, but it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case, the way that Wai Sang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Mingzi Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Mingzi was a brutal wound to the head, but the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Tsang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Tsang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Tsang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Tsang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Tsang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Tsang heading towards Sinsel Bank.
Tsang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wai Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Tsang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Mingzi and Tsang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wai Sang against Mingzi Yang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse, it's very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Ming Xi Yang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Mingzi divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Mingzi and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Mingzi and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead up to that fateful morning, it appears Mingzi had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Ming Xi Yang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge. Could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wei Hong Zhang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Sang guilty.
Wei Sang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Sang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. It just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Sang now behind bars, The community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed the whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.
Shocking true crime Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix, when a victim of circumstance is in the wrong place at the wrong time in You Murdered at First Sight.
On Friday morning, my wife Becky was dressed to perfection. A knee-length red dress with sheer black tights. A pair of high-heeled shoes completed the ensemble. "Holy shit, you look amazing." I feigned ignorance when I asked, "What are you dressed up like that for?" "Nothing much, just wanted to dress up." You have to know my wife to realize how strange that statement was. This was a woman who lived for jeans. Monday through Thursday, she had to wear nice clothes to work, but on Friday, her uniform was designer jeans tucked into a pair of black leather boots with a blouse or sweater. In our 5 years of marriage, she never changed once. And she certainly didn't dress this nicely Monday through Thursday. "If you dress this nice, I'll take you to the dance tonight. I'll order dinner for 6 people." "Okay." That was all she said. Okay. Not where, just okay. I wanted to press on, but I needed to make a business call to the East Coast before leaving for the office. Admittedly, my thoughts were distracted by how hot my wife looked. And, knowing why, it bothered me even more. She gave me a cursory kiss before leaving for work. Becky was one of 12 technical assistants for a large automotive tool supplier. Their job was to be the liaison between the 40-plus sales reps and the warehouse, entering their orders into the system and sending confirmation emails to customers. For the past few weeks, Becky had been acting a little strange. Nothing major, but rather a lot of little things. One of them was that she kept mentioning one of the new sales reps, Vince Davis. She often came home frustrated that some of them didn't understand anything, but she seemed to have some funny anecdote about Vince every day. He couldn't be wrong. This caught my attention, and I decided to do a little investigating. Becky always slept in on Saturdays. I got up at my usual 6 in the morning, poured a cup of coffee, and started reading her letters. Most of them were idle chatter, of no interest to anyone. Not discouraged, I continued my search, and after checking the trash can, I discovered I was at the bottom. My wife had dutifully deleted all of Vince's emails and her replies, but never bothered to empty the trash garbage can. I copied everything they'd exchanged onto a flash drive for safekeeping, and then started reading them. I thought it was odd that he was sending business messages on her personal account, but soon their tone changed to flirting. Then they got very personal. He commented on what she was wearing and speculated about what kind of underwear she was wearing underneath. Becky reacted like a lovesick 14-year-old girl teasing him back. I found it very difficult to contain my rage as the emails got closer to the actual date. He turned on more and more servings of crap, and she devoured them. I nearly smashed her laptop when I read how the bastard had moved on to weasels and tried to talk her into going to work in a commando suit. When she said she was only doing it for her husband, he whined like a sick puppy trying to get her to agree to at least wear panties to work. I smiled when she blew him off, but that didn't stop him. The next night, he tried to get her to send naked selfies, but thankfully, she flatly refused. But it was obvious he felt comfortable enough to step up his virtual seduction. I was tempted to confront her as soon as she woke up, but I realized I needed to cool down, or I might kill her. I left a note on the desk that I had some errands to run. I thoughtfully left my cell phone on the counter. I talked to myself for a long time, trying to decide what to do next. By the time I got back, it was already dark. Becky hugged me and told me she was worried something had happened to me. I said, "I called your mom and your friends, but no one has seen you. Where have you been? Why didn't you call?" I bit my tongue and didn't say what my mind was screaming. Instead, I said, "I had a lot to think about." On Sunday, Becky surprised me by waking me up with sex. She was an absolute vixen in bed. Knowing what she was hiding sucked all the romance out of her performance. She noticed my lack of enthusiasm and asked, "Are you feeling okay?" I ignored her question and avoided her for the rest of the day. On Monday morning, I checked her inbox again and found over 24 messages she had exchanged while she was so concerned about me. There wasn't a single message asking if they had seen her deadbeat husband. For the rest of the week, they averaged a couple messages a day. The weasel had lodged himself deeply in her mind. And then, to quote the immortal expression of Alice in Wonderland, things got curiouser and curiouser. On Friday night, Davis announced that he had saved Becky's job. I read with great curiosity his statement that he had discovered an error in the pricing of a nationwide contract so big that she would have been fired for sure. This seemed like a lie, since Becky was a math genius and balanced our checkbook every month without even using a calculator. When I read his next message, I realized he was setting her up. He kept reminding Becky that she said she owed him a huge debt. As a reward, he wanted to take her out to dinner somewhere special, just for the two of them. He used several double entendres to make it clear exactly what he wanted to eat. Becky seemed oblivious to his words. The last message was dated Wednesday. He reminded her that he'd taken a big risk covering for her mistake and would probably lose his job if his boss found out what he'd done. Becky wanted him to assure her that it was just two friends who had gone out to lunch together. His response made me boil over. Yes, just two friends, who will become much closer friends. He then gave specific instructions on what she should wear for their private lunch date. When I saw what she was wearing that morning, I knew I had to act quickly to save my marriage. Becky had lunch every day from 11:30 to 12:30. At 11:25, I showed up unannounced to take my wife to lunch. I was looked at strangely by several women I passed, as if they shared a dirty secret. When I showed up at Becky's workplace, she almost screamed, "What are you doing here?" That drew even more attention. Do I need a reason to take my beautiful wife out on a lunch date? Becky opened her eyes wide, stammering, "I can't. You forgot we are having dinner tonight. Besides, I'm going out to lunch with Mary Beth and Irene." Both threw her a look that I interpreted as, "Don't suck me into your cesspool." Irene spoke first. "Girl, nothing is more important than you going to lunch with your husband." Mary Beth shook her head. "You know I always take my lunch with me." "Sounds like you're stuck with me." I grinned my best Cheshire cat grin. Becky was as nervous as a whore in church when I held out my hand to her. At that moment, a smarmy man in a cheap suit walked in. He was a typical scrappy traveling salesman, always on the case and full of shit. He started to say, "Who's ready to go to?" but didn't finish the sentence. He froze when he saw me holding my wife's hand. I could hear the other technical assistants giggling behind me. I was glad I was wearing my new tailored suit. I looked successful, and he looked like a used car salesman. "Alex, this is Vince Davis." He held out his hand. I ignored it and said, "My wife and I will be back in an hour." He just stood there, shuffling from foot to foot, looking stupid until he finally asked one of the ladies a lame question about an item that wasn't in stock. I worked up the courage to stop by the grocery store where a very tasty lunch was waiting for me. I spread it out on one of the picnic tables provided by the company. Becky chatted non-stop about work, but for some reason never once mentioned Davis. Then I said, "If I didn't know better, I'd think that pompous jackass thought he was taking you to lunch." Becky started choking on her roast beef sandwich. I handed her something to drink and asked, "Honey, is there something you want to tell me?" Her silence lasted for over a minute. She wouldn't look me in the eye when she finally spoke. "I really screwed up on a big order. I priced an item so low I probably would have been fired. Vince noticed the mistake and corrected it. I told him I owed him a big debt of gratitude. It's just an expression people say all the time. Vince said he wanted to go on a lunch date to pay him back for saving my job. So this morning when you said, I just felt like dressing up, you weren't being honest with me. Well, he said he wanted me to look nice. You let that piece of shit tell you what to wear. He kind of asked me to, well, yeah, I guess he told me to wear a red dress. You know all the women you work with think you're having an affair with him. Becky screamed. Who told you that? I saw it in their faces as I walked by. She stammered. Let me guess. He was hanging around you, bringing you coffee, telling you jokes. No, yeah. He was just friendly. Friendly? Did he bring coffee to any of the other 11 women who do the same job for him that you do? No, but your coworkers aren't blind. They saw him wooing you, just as they noticed you wearing a dress on Friday. It took a few minutes, but Becky finally admitted that the attention had stroked her ego and she'd fallen for him like a silly schoolgirl. It was exciting, sneaking around teasing each other, but we were just playing. He knew I'd never do anything to him. Either you're an idiot or you think I'm an idiot. Becky, I read the letters. Why do you think he blackmailed you into going on a private lunch date? He was going to have sex with you whether you wanted him to or not. No, no. He wouldn't. He knows I'm married. I would never cheat on you. Maybe not physically. I touched her forehead with my index finger. But you did it here, and that's as good as it gets. Becky started to cry. I put my arms around her and said, You betrayed me. You betrayed our wedding vows. And actions have consequences. Give me one good reason why I should stay married to a woman I can't trust. She began sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. Finally, she managed to whisper, I'm sorry. You're sorry. I'm sorry, I shouted. That's not the reason. That's what a cheating wife says when she gets caught. If I hadn't come when I did, he'd be sleeping with you right now. I took my hand off her shoulder and got up to leave. That brought her back to reality. She screamed, No! And lunged forward to grab my leg. Let go! I'm getting away! She gasped like an asthmatic. Don't go! I have tons of reasons. You saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. She paused to calm herself. You're the only man I've ever loved. You're the only man I've ever wanted. A long pause followed as she tried to catch her breath. Tears and snot rolled down her face. From the day I met you, I've wanted you. Without you, I don't want to live. Please forgive me. I'm such an idiot. Tell me what I have to do to make things right, and I'll do it. Anything. Please don't leave me. She collapsed to her knees and started sobbing. I waited a couple minutes, then took her face in my hands and said, I love you too much not to forgive you. But we'll talk about this a lot more when we get home. I held out a handkerchief to her. Now wipe your face, you look like hell. Becky jumped up and screamed with joy. I love you so much. She threw her arms around me and gave me the best kiss ever. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I wrapped my arms around my wife and squeezed her tightly. I checked the time and asked, Are you ready to meet your coworkers? As ready as I am at all. Then it's nearing the hour to make things right. I cleared my desk, then escorted my wife to her workstation. I looked around for Davis, but he had the good sense to stay out of sight. Two of her coworkers approached and introduced themselves. Becky sat down and hung her head bashfully. I asked them in a loud voice to keep an eye on my wife because I was afraid her red dress would attract human scum. Just because I forgave her didn't mean I would forget her indiscretion. You should have seen the smirks on their faces. Both asked for my business card to keep me in the loop. I wrote my cell phone number on the back. Becky's face was as red as her dress. My last stop was the Human Relations Department, where I introduced myself to Miss Gladys White, the Director of Human Resources. Miss White looked like a refugee from a 1950s black and white movie. I even caught a hint of witch's ointment and mothballs in her silver hair. I introduced myself and asked for a few minutes. What can I do for you, Mr. Niles? I think we can help each other. My wife, Becky, for you, Rebecca, works as a technical assistant. Ah, the legendary Scarlet Lady. I take it you're here to defend her honor. Ms. White may have been ancient, but she had a keen sense of irony. "You are not the first to seek an audience with me about this situation. Unfortunately, your wife has become quite a topic of conversation." I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This may seem a little unusual, but I would like to file a sexual harassment complaint against one of your sales representatives. Let me guess. Vince Davis." A thin smile cracked across her weathered face. "You're right, Mr. Niles. This is very unusual, but you're piquing my curiosity. Please continue." "My wife is the most dedicated employee you have, but at 5 p.m. she switches over and forgets her work until 8 the next morning. However, for the past few weeks, she can't seem to carry on a conversation at dinner without mentioning Davis. What he did, what he said, ad nauseum. This has not escaped my attention, so I began to make a little investigation. I got up half an hour earlier than my wife and used that time to search her computer every morning. It took all my self-control not to scream when I read the Davis's emails. The first few were work-related. Then he started flirting with her. He even tried to talk her into going to work without panties." "Oh my God," Miss White said. "Last week, he sent an email claiming that he had discovered a significant error in a large order she was entering, an error that caused the item to be priced below cost. He said he corrected the price and re-entered the order, and no one found out a thing. She foolishly said she was deeply indebted to him for saving her job. Davis began pressuring her to go on a private lunch date so she could properly thank him. In addition to emails, he harassed her at work. Becky kept reminding him that she was happily married and hoped she hadn't given him the wrong impression. Eventually, he wore her down and she agreed to have lunch at a restaurant. But that was the end of it. As you can see, his idea of her being deeply indebted to him had nothing to do with buying a hamburger and fries. I held out the printed emails to her. "One moment, Mr. Niles. Our sales representatives don't have access to the billing portion of our program. He couldn't have done what he claims." She picked up the phone and dialed a few numbers. "Fortunately, we have a keystroke logging program. In a few minutes, we'll know what really happened. William, I need your skills." She explained exactly what Davis was going to do, then looked at the last email. "Check Rebecca Niles' computer from last week. You're sure about that? Every single order. I'm sorry I doubted you. Thank you very much, William. Mr. Niles, it appears your wife has been sold the goods. Every order she entered was 100% accurate, no changes. From what her supervisor said at her last performance review, I would be very surprised to hear otherwise." Unfortunately, my wife believed him. That's really very unfortunate. There have been no letters for the last 2 mornings, but when I saw the way she was dressed, I realized that the bastard had blackmailed her into going on their lunch date. That raises an interesting question. I can't understand why he would want to force your wife to draw so much attention to herself with that dress. One would think discretion would be paramount. I bet Davis is a misogynist, and he was more interested in flaunting his control over her to make her his trophy, so to speak. It doesn't matter if he had sex with her, as long as his buddies think he did. I think you're right, Mr. Niles. After leaving Miss White, I had the distinct impression that Davis was going to have to update his resume. I had a bad feeling that the bastard would be waiting for my wife in the parking lot after work. Fortunately, I had a good friend in the police department who was happy to drive through the parking lot during the layoff. Officer Chelik even found a parking spot where he had a clear shot of Becky's car on his security camera. The hardest part for me was heeding his admonition to stay out of a 5-mile radius if something happens. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to your wife. Davis waited for Becky, hiding behind the van. When she pressed the remote button to open her door, he pounced on her. He threw her down on the trunk and screamed, "You goddamn bitch! You're going to pay for what you did!" In Davis's defense, there's no way he could have known that the man who pulled him away from my wife was a police officer. Too bad he swung before he looked. His fist hit Officer Selleck's jaw, causing him to stagger but not fall. He retaliated with several blows to Davis's head with his baton until he let go of Becky. By then, blood was pouring from his nose and mouth. He swung blindly and was rewarded with a taser shot to the chest. It jerked his legs up. He collapsed face down on the pavement and went limp. Chelik knelt down and cuffed him behind his back. By this time, a large crowd had gathered to watch what was happening. A few minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up. He was still twitching as they loaded him into the back seat of the car. Mary Beth and Irene led the crowd, applauding the police officers as they led Davis away. Becky looked shocked. Officer Seelig told her he would take her to the station to file a report. I was on my way to my next client when the phone rang. It was Irene. Thought you might be interested to know Davis was in the stockroom berating your wife for not going to lunch with him when he was called into HR. I saw him about a half hour later when he was being escorted out by a security guard. Next thing I knew, he was getting his ass kicked by a cop for bothering your wife. And oh, his face doesn't look too pretty anymore. Irene, I can't thank you enough. Becky is lucky to have a friend. After what happened with Davis, I don't want you to be my enemy. We both laughed. Epilogue. That night, we didn't go out to dinner and dancing. Instead, we ordered pizza and spent the evening sitting in front of the fireplace, drinking wine and talking. Becky was embarrassed by how naive and gullible she was. She called me her hero and said I was like a knight in shining armor protecting her virtue. Many tears were shed, but now we are closer than ever. Then we went upstairs to have sex in the name of forgiveness.